Okay, we're kicking off this first Facebook Live. It's 7:59, so I'm just a little bit early. This is my first live stream, so I'm sure there's going to be many technical difficulties. There's going to be plenty of technical difficulties. Um, my name's Andrew C. Piazza. I'm a writer of books, so we're going to talk about books. We're going to talk about horror books. We're going to talk about urban fantasy books. We're going to talk about some of the books I wrote and some of the inspiration that was behind them, some of the process that's behind them. Feel free to make comments, dive in, make many comments. You can ask any questions you like. Just join on in. So I just want to make a quick reminder, and I'll probably say this a couple times during this, is that everyone's in a rough spot with the whole coronavirus thing going on. So with everyone not being able to work and that sort of thing, money's tight. And so I just wanted to point out that I do have all of my novels are in Kindle Unlimited, which is Amazon's sort of Netflix for books. I think it's $10 a month, and you can do as many books as you like and all that good stuff. So all those books are free to read in Kindle Unlimited. So if you need something to do to help pass the time and take the world away, check out any of those books. Like I said, free to read on Kindle Unlimited. All right. So let me talk just a little bit about writing books. I'm just playing with my stream a little bit here and seeing if I get to see. Oh, come on now. If I get to see, I'm trying to figure out all the controls and bells and whistles and knobs on this thing. You should be able to make comments anywhere you like. And I thought I was going to be able to see if people were signed on here or not, but I can't really see anything. So, like I said, we're going to have plenty of technical difficulties. So I'm going to make a little test comment right here. There we go. It just showed up. Okay. So in talking about horror books, one of the questions that comes up sometimes is why write horror books? Why not write comedy books? Why not just make people laugh or whatever sort of books? I think that horror novels are really useful, and horror in general is useful as you can almost think of it as an inoculation of sorts against bad times, hard times. So you can think of fears that we are going to take a look at or confront, but we can do it in a much more diluted way. I mean, there are real scary things out there. There are real dangers in life. And so a lot of those dangers can feel a little overwhelming to look at head on. And so with horror fiction, we have an opportunity to look at it through a lens of make believe and fiction. And so we can experience a sort of diluted or less intense version of that fear and then work through it. And so then eventually, when that actual bad thing or that fear that we have does show up, we may have a bit of built up resistance to it. So if you need a reason to read horror fiction versus just enjoying horror fiction, there's one for you. Me personally, I just have always enjoyed it. Let me see if I can do it. I've personally always enjoyed it. I remember, growing up, I was a big fan of reading Stephen King and then Dean Koontz and other horror writers. And so other writers I also liked would dip in and out of the horror and science fiction and fantasy genres like Ray Bradbury or Harlan Ellison. I was a big fan of Harlan Ellison for a long time because he was always so experimental with everything that he did. He took a lot of chances. And so I really enjoyed reading his stories. It didn't always work, the chances that he took, but he always took chances. And I kind of like that. And so I find myself sometimes doing that with some of the stories that I write. I would say that the most obvious example of that would be in the Mage Hunters series, which started off as a novella called Shards of Glass. I actually have the full novel here right now. It eventually became an entire series. So Shards of Glass started off as um, an experiment to see if I could write a story with shifting points of view. And so I would switch from third person, which is he did this, he did that, to first person, which is I did this, I did that, and switch back and forth from that and see what telling a story in that format was like. It was at first a novella of about 25,000 words, about 100 pages or so. And I really liked how it turned out. It was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. And then I got a lot of feedback from people asking, well, when are we going to see more of this? Because in the process of writing the story, I'd created this sort of urban fantasy world. And I wrote this back in the, let's see, that was probably it was a long time ago. It was probably the late 90s that I wrote Shards of Glass, the original one. So I had created this urban fantasy world where you had modern day SWAT teams taking on rogue wizards, bad guy wizards who were doing stuff. So, so people like that premise. They seem to get caught up in this idea of, it was almost like Die Hard with magic and monsters. Originally, the story was set in a futuristic world, but I kind of cut that out because I realized I really didn't need it to be futuristic, that it was okay to do, that it would be okay to do just a modern day version, a contemporary version. And so, like I said, people started asking, when are we going to see some more of this? It was an interesting idea. We want to see some more stories like this. And so I started thinking about, okay, well, to avoid spoilers for the story, the way it originally ended, it wasn't really built to be a continuing series or anything like that. But I kept thinking about that world and those characters in that series, and I just kept thinking like of little things I could do with it and stories I could tell with it, and so I just decided to expand it into a series. The original novel, or excuse me, the original novella, is actually still available in my short story collection, Strange Days, in the original format. But I realized that as I needed to build into a series, that the novella wasn't really doing a good job of introducing a world for a whole series. And so after I wrote the second book, which is called Resurrection Day, and then getting into the third book, I started realizing, oh, you know what? That first novella just isn't enough. It needs to be expanded. And so I ended up expanding it into a full-size novel, a short novel. It's about 55,000 words, so a little over 200 pages. But that works. It works much better now as an original, or excuse me, as an initial story for a whole series. So that was a lot of fun, but it's difficult to write in that style, in that shifting first person, third person by chapter shift. You have to do a lot of planning ahead of time as far as plotting out your novel ahead of time. I usually do that anyway. There are a couple different people talk about writers being either outliners or pantsers. Sometimes they change the terminology a little bit. Some people don't like that phrase, pantser versus outliner, for whatever reason. But most of us are a hybrid of some sort. Most of us have some idea of where the story is going to go and outline to a certain extent, or just write and let the story go where it goes. I'm always more on the outlining part of things. I don't know if that's because I'm too scatterbrained to be able to keep track of a whole novel in my head at once, or what. But you have to with the Mage Hunter series. I've had to do a lot of that outlining just to know which perspective to shift into next, and how, as the story progresses, which person I need to follow here in the story. So, if you're just joining in again, I'm Andrew C. Piazza, writer of a bunch of different kinds of books. Please feel free to send in a comment if you can. This is my first time doing one of these, so I don't know exactly where all the buttons and knobs are on this thing. So, but please feel free to send in some comments or questions, and I'll be happy to answer them. So I was talking about urban fantasy and pantsing versus outlining. So I'll shift a little bit into talking about the World War II horror novel that a lot of you have read called One Last Gasp. Hold that one up too. So this one was written also a while back, actually. That one was written in about, I think it was 2000, over the course of the year 2000. So it's been a while since I wrote it. And it took quite a while to write that book. That took a good solid year, and it was a heavy duty year. It wasn't a year of, maybe I'll pick it up for a few weeks, put it down for review. It was pretty solid all the way through it. But it was a labor of love. I loved writing that book. It came out really well. It started as kind of an experiment where I wanted to see if I could mash up a war story, in this case, a World War II war story, with a horror story, and have them be so intertwined that they couldn't be taken apart. I had been exposed to a horror novel set during World War II in the past. It's by a guy named F. Paul Wilson. It's called The Keep. Sorry to F. Paul Wilson, but I didn't particularly like it. I didn't like how anything. It just didn't seem to work really well for me. One of the things about that story that I, at least my feeling on it, was that it didn't need to be in World War II. They could have just taken that story right out of World War II and stuck it anywhere, and it would have been the same story. So when I wrote my novel, I wanted it to be that if you took it out of World War II, it wouldn't make sense. If you took the horror out of it, it wouldn't make any sense. If you took the war story out of it, it wouldn't make any sense. They had to be completely intertwined. And it ended up working out pretty well. One of the things about that novel that seems to work really well is that the kind of horror that I like to write is called Lovecraftian, or sometimes called cosmic horror. And this is based around a guy named H.P. Lovecraft, who wrote back in the 1920s or so. And he was actually, interestingly enough, he was a contemporary of Robert E. Howard, who was famous for writing the Conan the Barbarian stories. And in fact, they would correspond back and forth with each other. And you can see a little bit of the influences of H.P. Lovecraft on Robert E. Howard in some of these strange monsters that Conan ends up fighting and encountering in his travels. Anyway, H.P. Lovecraft wrote a very particular kind of horror. It was usually centered around these massive elder gods that, to which humanity was essentially like an ant or a gnat. They were meaningless and powerless compared to these super powerful elder gods. And a big part of that horror, this cosmic horror, taps into this fear that we all kind of have deep down inside, of being sort of this tiny, somewhat powerless creature in this vast, uncaring, dangerous universe. And that's kind of I think of that as the horror that lies below all other horror, or the fear that lies beneath all other fears. Why do we fear death? Why do we fear whatever? It's because we're afraid of this sense of possibility that we're a meaningless part of the universe, that there's nothing that comes after this, that there's this vast, great universe. We're on this tiny little speck, and we're essentially this meaningless or minor race that could easily be wiped out, and no one would even notice. That's the kind of terror that he wrote about, that was kind of underlying everything that he wrote about, and that's the kind of horror that I like to write about, because it lets me talk about a lot of different kind of things that I like to talk about. So in the case of One Last Gasp, it meshed up really well. That kind of horror meshed up really well with a World War II horror story, and it would pretty mash up really well with any horror story because of that very reason. One of the things that I did a tremendous amount of research for that book. I'm a recovering World War II history addict, and so that writing that book gave me an excuse to just go crazy with diving into World War II in general and the Battle of the Bulge in particular. Once I decided that that was the particular place and time that the story was going to be set, and I have now just tons and tons of books. I have crazy books. Like I have a whole shelf on my bookshelf over there that with books like the Encyclopedia of Weapons of World War II and other books like that that I gave myself permission to buy and go through strictly for research purposes for this book. But as I read, one of my favorite thing was to read about are the personal accounts of the various soldiers. And one of the things that you realize as you one of the themes that keeps coming up is this process by which soldiers kind of go through as they get into a war zone and they start to think of it. At first they're kind of cocky. These are mostly very young men who are going to war. And so, you're talking 18, 19-year-olds, they think they're invincible, of course. And so they show up thinking, I'm going to be fine. Yeah, this is dangerous, but I'm going to be fine because I'm just, I'm too young, I'm too smart, I'm too good looking, I'm too good, I'm just too awesome. And I'm not going to get killed. Then when they kind of smack into reality for a bit and they start to see, oh, people are dropping dead all around me. And, it could, it's like, well, then it becomes, all right, this is dangerous, and it's theoretically it could happen, but I'm too well trained, I'm too well equipped, I've got too good of friends all around me taking care of me, so it's not going to happen to me. I'm going to be fine. And then they continue to watch friends die all around them, often without rhyme or reason to it, and eventually they come to this sort of realization: oh, it could happen to me, and it will. And that, again, that kind of lines up, I think, pretty well with that same sort of cosmic terror that I was just talking about from H.P. Lovecraft, that this sense of not being the center of the universe. We get caught up in our own ego a lot and start to think of ourselves as, oh, well, no, I have to live. I mean, everybody else could die, but I have to live because to us, we're the center of the universe. And when you start to get put into situations where all that gets stripped away and you realize, oh, in the face of a massive universe, an uncaring universe, then no, that's just not the case. So I think because of those two similarities, I think that mashup worked pretty well with One Last Gasp. So I was really pleased with the way that came out, but that did take a long time to write. That's a big, fairly largish novel. It's 150,000 words, and there's a lot in it. There's a lot of story in it. I try to cut out all the fluff whenever possible, or any kind of padding. I try to pace all of my books more or less as thrillers. I want you turning the page. I want you to keep you engaged, mainly because these are the kinds of books that I like to read. So that's the kinds of books that I like to write. Some people really enjoy reading gigantic 1,000-page novels with tons and tons and tons of description that don't necessarily move at a fast pace. I'm not particularly a big fan of those. So I tend to write more streamlined, moving forward type stories and novels. So that's why One Last Gasp looks the way it was. But it also makes it kind of a dense novel for 150,000 words, which is already a little long. Excuse me. That's even there's still there's a lot of story in there even for that length. When I was writing it, that research was absolutely critical to doing it, not just for accuracy of the setting, which is always important because you want to be able to keep people immersed and create a reality that's as real as possible for everyone that's reading. But it was also important because I found that as I was doing a lot of the research on it, different ideas would come up, or different details would come up that I thought, oh, I got to include that. I got to include that in my book. So let me give you an example of one of those. During the research that I found out about something called Blue 88s, and this was a drug, a hypnotic drug that was used to treat. They called it battle fatigue cases or shell shock cases. Nowadays, we would call it PTSD. They were called Blue 88s because it's a pill. It's a little blue pill, and the reason why they were called 88s was the Germans had an artillery piece, the 88 millimeter, that was notorious for being very dangerous, and so they're very highly feared. And so American troops would, know an 88 round and be very respectful and fearful of that kind of a shell coming in. And so, since these were nasty little pills, they were calling them Blue 88s. So, what they did with these was they would take a battle fatigue case, so someone who's been on the line for so long and they're getting shelled and they're living in a hole that they've dug, and it's, they haven't had enough to eat and they hadn't have enough to sleep, and they're a mess, and eventually they break because it's just been too much for too long. And they would take these individuals and they would bring them back to a rearward area, and they would give them this narcotic drug. Now, this is an era. This is 1940s. So this is an era in which psychiatry hasn't really progressed that far. And one of the big tenets of psychiatry at this time is catharsis. This idea that if you have this giant emotional release, that's going to fix things. Since then, psychiatrists move forward from that. I'm like, it's really not that great. But at the time, they thought, oh yeah, we'll give them this cathartic release and they'll be fine. So they would bring these soldiers who were shell-shocked and give them this narcotic drug, and which would knock them out. And they would force them to relive the experience of being out on the line while they were under this narcotic drug. So I was watching documentary footage, black and white footage of these various doctors doing this, where they'd have a guy, you can see him writhing in there on this bed, and the doctor's going, "Look out! Here comes the shells!" Boom, and the soldier's freaking out. He's screaming no, and kind of like rolling around on the bed, and you watch this and you think, like, who thought this was a good idea? This is terrible. They're torturing these people. And after a day or two of that, they would put them in a new uniform, because they were usually living in the dirt and, filthy and dirty. So they would quick give them a shower, put them in a new set of uniform, push them out back on the line. They basically were duct taping these guys back together and shoving them back out into the line. One of the things that was really interesting about watching that was one of the men that came up with this, or was in charge of that program, talked about it. And this was his interview was considerably after the war, because it was in color photo, and you could just see he was an older man, and he was still visibly shaken as he was describing what they were doing. He was on the verge of tears, basically describing it, because he realized that they were basically tormenting these men and barely taping them back together to push them back out in front of the cannons, and that he hated himself for doing that to people. At the time, this was felt necessary, and so they did it. But you could see this tremendous amount of remorse that this guy had, and this was, decades afterwards. He couldn't even talk about what the program was about without kind of getting choked up, and he was really trying to keep that under control. And I found that to be such an unusual and interesting portion of history from that time that I got to put that into the book somewhere. I got to use that. And it ended up being one of my favorite chapters in that novel, in which one of the characters undergoes something very traumatic, and to the point where he's completely shut. He's unresponsive. And they end up having to give him these Blue 88s and try to hypnotize him and make him relive it, because they need to find out what happened. They don't know what they're up against. And so that was an opportunity to include that And it really worked out well. I think that again, like I said, that chapter is one of my favorite chapters in the book. So historical research like that can really, really help give you ideas as to what you can do with the story or where you can go next with it, or in the case of historical fiction, what kind of details to put in or leave out. And there was a bunch of those. There was a bunch of those in One Last Gasp that where I came across something and I was, oh, wow, we got to include that in there. So a lot of those details were really, really helpful to find out about, including things like soldiers would talk about the Ardennes forest, which is where this battle occurred, and people would talk about how close the pines are together. So you're in a pine forest essentially, and the descriptions of it sounded almost like soldiers talking about the jungles of Vietnam, just being so dense that you can't see anything. And they would say that if people would get 10, 20 yards away from you, they could just be lost, and you couldn't make a lot of noise because people would just shoot at noise. And you had to be careful not to bump into a tree, because if the snow came down off the pine boughs, the Germans would just machine gun that whole area. So it's little details like that I would try to include in the book, and it helps a lot to get a sense of what is it like to be there. I have been in dense. I haven't been in combat. Certainly haven't been at the Battle of the Bulge, but I have been in dense pine trees. And so I know what they're talking about. There is a sense of like, wow, if you could step out and all of a sudden there would be a clearing with buildings, you would never know it was there before you were right on top of it. So little details like that are great to include in there. And so I'm doing I continue to do a lot of historical research for my current work in progress, which is also a historical novel. I guess I'll talk about that just a little bit. I don't want to give too much away. But the work in progress that I've got going on now is a historical novel. It will also be like One Last Gasp. It'll be in first person, so it's a narrated story. It's not going to be set during World War II. It's set a little bit further back, and it's set. Actually, that's been a tricky part. That's been a tricky part of writing this, has been that the setting, unlike One Last Gasp, set during World War II, Battle of the Bulge, tons of historical information, just piles and piles and piles of it. This particular setting is not as well documented, so it's been a lot more difficult finding really good, especially primary sources. I always like to try to get to primary sources, people who were there, and then writing about it afterwards. There have been some that I've been able to find, but that's been a real challenge. But it's been interesting because it's a lot of the historical stuff that's going on in this time frame kind of has echoes now as well. So hopefully that will be interesting to some people when that gets ready. Just to give you an idea, I'm about 2/3 of the way done with it. I hope to have it ready to go in May. So as we get closer, I'll reveal more and more, and I'll do a little bit with a cover tease and all that sort of good stuff. Once again, if you've clocked in late, please feel free to jump in, shoot me a comment, shoot me a question, whatever you like. There we go. Like I said, this is my first Facebook Live, so I'm still trying to figure out all the bells and whistles. I'm not really sure. Let's see here. Not really sure if yeah. Okay. So, what else do I want to talk about? I just think I'll put another reminder in that since we're all kind of stuck at home, and a lot of people are out of work. I know I still I'm not a full-time author, so I have a day job, and so at the office where I work, I have a chiropractic office. Hey, Will, I'll get to your question in just a second. A lot of people are talking about money being tight, and so all my books are in Kindle Unlimited, so you can read those for free if you're a subscriber to that. Will asked me, are there any future plans for the Mage Hunter series? Yes and no. So the Mage Hunter series right now is 3 books. I'm right now just kind of seeing what the reaction of everybody is to the Mage Hunter series, because it's a little unusual. It's not a typical urban fantasy. A lot of the urban fantasy that's out there is more along the lines. I see a lot of what's it called, academy, so like magic school type stuff, or um, it's just what I've got is a little bit different, and so I want to see and make sure that there's going to be enough interest, because there is a big investment of time into that. If I do move forward with it, I have another three novel arc planned out. So the current series as a trilogy, it's actually a three novel arc. There's a storyline that goes all the way through all three. I want to do that again if I continue it. I would want books 4 through 6 to be another three novel arc. So I have some ideas for that, as far as new characters, new opponents for our characters to face, and what the overall concept behind the series is going to, or that three novel arc would be. But before I dive into all that, I'm not a super fast writer. I think I write decently fast, but I don't do. I'm not one of the book a month type guys. So 3 books for me is a year or more of work. So before I do that, I want to get a sense of if that series is popular enough that I can justify that much time and effort into it. I'd kind of like to. I have a lot of fun writing that series. One of the great joys of writing in that series is because of the shifting perspectives. I get to write in a bunch of different voices. So third person is third person. It's somewhat neutral, although you kind of follow a person's perspective in third person. But when I write first person chapters, they shift from one character to another. So I get to write those first person chapters in very different voices. So there's a big difference in a voice between, especially someone like Mickey versus someone like Dredd. They have very different perspectives on how they see the world and how they react to the world and how they think about things. And so it's fun to be able to tell that story from so many different viewpoints and in different voices. So I'd love to do that. I'd also love to see that series go into audio. That's Audio is something I'm toying with getting into. I might have to do something. This is a tough time to do it, again, because of the coronavirus and economic considerations that's hitting everybody. I was considering doing a Kickstarter for an audio book of One Last Gasp, but I don't know if now's the time for that. Everyone's kind of going to be tightening the belt for a while. Everyone's going to get punched in the gut a little bit if everyone's out of work for weeks and weeks or months or whatever at a time. So, it doesn't seem like the right time to say, hey, donate to this project. But I would like to see some of these works get into audio. I think it would be a lot of fun to see, especially something like Mage Hunters, because of the different perspectives. If I could get a bunch of different voice actors to do the different chapters of different characters, so that might be fun. Maybe that wouldn't work out. Maybe that would. I don't know, but it'd be a neat experiment. So thanks for the question, Will, and thanks a lot. I really appreciate your support. Will's one of these guys that's taken the time to write reviews on pretty much all of my books, I think. And I really appreciate that. That is a huge help to me. One of the biggest things you can do if you have any author that you like their work and you want to support their work is go on Amazon or whatever relevant platform you purchase the book on and leave them a review. It doesn't have to be anything big. Just put that in there, because that is a big part of a person's buying decision. I know when I go on Amazon, books are not, or for anything, one of the things I look at is the reviews, and then you kind of sift through them and see, like, all right, are some of these nonsense, or some of these okay, or maybe someone was having a bad day and left a bad review. That's a big help for any author that you want to try to support, is to leave them a review. We got another question. Which novels, novellas, short stories are you most proud of? Yeah, that's always a tough question, because the running joke is it's kind of like asking which are your favorite babies. I think that there are some that kind of stand out for different reasons. One Last Gasp has definitely been a big crowd pleaser, and I'm so very thrilled to see that. That, like I said, that was a lot of effort for again a good solid year, putting everything into that. I mean, I kind of went overboard with it. I would, for the different battle scenes, I would draw out maps so I could keep track of where the different units were and all that sort of thing. Um, so to see that worked out, that all not knowing going into it whether or not it would work out, which I never do, and then seeing that the response has been so strong and so strongly positive to it, especially when I get feedback from uh, military veterans who have kind of said, yeah, you nailed it, and that feels great. That feels great because I'm not a military veteran, and so to know that I was able to kind of still resonate with people that have gone through that kind of thing, and it still works for them. That's very gratifying, very very gratifying. Um, but then there's other works too that like I said, the Mage Hunter series is a lot of fun because of the different perspectives. Some of the short stories that I've written have been fun for one reason or another. I have a. I'll talk about a silly one. Um, I don't write as much comedy as I'd like to. I need to get back into writing a little bit more comedy. In my Strange Days um, short story collection, I do have a couple of stories that I write under my pen name, Christopher Andrews, that I do all my comedy under. Um, and there's one I always joke about how I never use uh, classic monsters. I'm not big on vampires. I'm not big on werewolves, but I do have a vampire story. It's called A Little Vampire Story, and it's a spoof of vampire stories. And the reason why that story got written is I was working in a coffee shop at the time. I was still going through chiropractic school. I was living in Atlanta, and I was working as a night manager at a Caribou coffee shop in just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. So I had a guy that used to come in, and he was a retired Air Force general, and we would talk back and forth a little bit. And he was a big reader, and he found out I was a writer, so we'd ask about what did I write, and I told him I write all kinds of stuff, but a lot of science fiction, fantasy, and horror. And he said, "Oh, you should write a vampire story. You should write a little vampire story." And I said, I'm not really into vampires. I think that even then, this would have been back in the late '90s. I was like, vampires are played out. I'm sick of it. Like, there's nothing new with that whole genre. I don't want to deal with it. It's just not my thing. Some people like it. That's great, but that's not really my thing. And he said, no, 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 you should write a little vampire story about a little vampire. And I thought, oh, now we're talking. Now we're talking. That's exactly my speed. So I wrote a little vampire story, which is about a 6-inch vampire. Um, so, and that's when I just loved that because it came out of such a neat little weird interaction with someone in a coffee shop, and it's a fun little story, and so I love that one too. So yeah, it's hard to tell. It's hard to pick one that you just are proud of and are most proud of, but that's some of them. So all right, I think we've been going for about 40 minutes. So unless anybody has any other questions or anything like that, I'll wrap this up. So let me just check the feed here. If there's any other questions, fire away with them. Otherwise, I'll just wrap this up. Okay. So thanks for being a part of this first Facebook Live event. I hope to do a few more of these in the future. And again, as I get closer to May. Oh, hold on. I got another one. Okay, Alan. Hey, Alan from Scotland. All right, fantastic. Any plans to do a sequel to One Last Gasp? I've kicked around some different ideas in my head about that. Not in the near future. That particular monster that's involved in that book, which is called the Geist, it could be revisited. If you haven't, Alan, be sure to check out the prequel to One Last Gasp called Flying Fortress, which is set on a B-17 bomber that you can just go to. If you don't have it, you can go to andrewpiazza.com and just click on the image that you'll see in the front, and you'll get my entire free starter library, which is 3 short stories. One of those is Flying Fortress. So that is a little bit of another dip into that world and that monster. I think if I went back to it, I would probably set it at a different time. I'd probably go either modern day or even futuristic with it. But I haven't come up with any firm plans for that. But it's a possibility. Um, it would be tough, just in the sense of that book really has a lot in it, and I kind of left it. I've kind of put everything into that book, so I don't know if I have more to say narratively with that particular with the Geist and what the Geist represents. But that could change. A year from now, I might say, "Oh, wait, I know exactly what I need to do with that." And then the next thing you know, I'm working on a sequel to One Last Gasp. And I guess we'll have to call it Another Last Gasp. I don't know. I have to give it some sort of name. I don't know. But thank you. Thank you for the question. Let's see here. Anybody else? Any other questions before we take off here? Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you, Alan. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Okay, I guess what I'll do is I'll wrap it up by saying, if you'd like to go, I do have a starter library. It's 3 short stories. 2 of those are prequels to the stuff we've been talking about tonight. One's a prequel to One Last Gasp. It's called Flying Fortress. It's a horror novel that's set on a B-17 flying fortress. Another one is called On the Job Training. That is a prequel to the Mage Hunters series, and you can think of that like the tagline is Magic, Monsters, and Mayhem, and I sometimes call it Die Hard with Monsters and Magic. Or somebody made the joke of instead of Harry Potter, it would be Dirty Harry Potter, which I kind of liked. And it's also been called Tactical Urban Fantasy, which is an interesting description. So that's the second. And then the third is called Independent Study. And that's from the Strange Days short story collection. And you can get those for free. Just go to andrewpiazza.com, click on the image of the stories that you see there. And, it just takes you to my sign up page, email list sign up page. You get 1 per day for 3 days. Although I might change that so you just get all 3 up front. And like I said, everyone's going to be kind of hurting for money, I think, for a little while. So get all the free stuff you can. So all right, thanks very much, everyone, for joining in here. This has been a blast. I had a lot of fun. 42 minutes has already gone by, and okay, so. I'll wrap this up, and I'll probably do this again soon in another month or so. And so save up your questions and all that sort of stuff. And hopefully by then I'll be able to reveal a little bit more about my next work in progress. So thanks again, and have a great night.